Who has seen the television show The Good Wife? Anybody? I have not, but I have a friend on Facebook who has tipped me off to a scene that I'd like to tell you about. The show is a courtroom drama with judges and lawyers, and I found this particular scene on YouTube, and I think it fits pretty well with today's sermon and the theme. Two lawyers are presenting before a judge, and the first lawyer acts with a great deal of arrogance by making truth statements about the case. After the first couple of truth statements, the judge interrupts the lawyer basically mid-sentence and says, "In your opinion." And the lawyer is confused and says, "Excuse me?" The judge responds saying, "All of this is your opinion. So in your opinion, the evidence leads to a certain conclusion, but this is your opinion." And the lawyer replies, "Yes, I thought it was obvious that this is my opinion, so I didn't think that I needed to state that this was my opinion." And the judge retorts, "I would like you to remind yourself and the court that this is your opinion, not that what you are stating is indeed fact." The lawyer learns very quickly and starts almost every successive sentence with, "in my opinion." It makes for a pretty funny scene, but would make for a horribly long sermon. But to tell you the truth, I would like to begin every sermon with the phrase, "in my opinion," to remind myself and you that I don't hold the truth on any of this. I research these passages, and I try to put them together in a sermon that makes some kind of sense, but in reality, a lot of this is said in my opinion. And a lot of the passages we've had recently are really difficult passages that are hard to make sense of. Now, in my opinion, I think I'm right. But people have been arguing about the meaning of Jesus' passages and parables and teachings for 2,000 years. So I'm happy to go along with the judge and the good wife and say that the rest of this sermon is in my opinion. Jesus tells a story about a cosmic courtroom drama. He sits on the throne as king and as judge, and all the nations come to him for judgment. But for Jesus, the judge, there are really no opinions in this story. He judges the nations and separates them like a shepherd separates sheep from goats. In the first century, Jewish shepherds let sheep and goats graze together during the day. And then at night, the shepherds would separate the sheep from the goats. In Jesus' story, he separates the sheep from the goats. Only the sheep is a metaphor for the good nations who are blessed and enter into God's kingdom. And the poor goats are those who are accursed and sent into the eternal fires prepared for the devil and his angels. Now, the criteria for Jesus' judgment is pretty interesting. Usually, our conservative Christian siblings think that the day of judgment will be determined by what you believed about Christ. If you believe the right things about Jesus, then you will enter into God's kingdom of heaven. But that's not the criteria that Jesus gives for the judgment. He says that the nations will be judged not by what they believed about him, but by how they treated those in need, what they did for who Jesus calls the least of these. The sheep may never have even heard of Jesus, but they did what Jesus taught. The sheep gave food to the hungry, water to the thirsty. They welcomed the stranger, gave clothes to those in need, cared for the sick, and visited people in prison. For as Jesus said, when you do any of those things to anyone, we do them to Jesus. And this passage has inspired many social activists. It's led individuals to create soup kitchens and food pantries and clothing drives and homeless shelters for the least of these. Why? Because we know that in serving them, we are also serving Jesus. In other words, if you want to find where Jesus is today, where God is in the world, don't primarily look to the powerful. Look to those on the margins. Meet them. Care for them. Develop relationships with them, because when we do meet them, we are meeting Jesus. And I want you to hear me out on this. This social activism is great. It's one of the many things that I love about our church. Your social activism inspires me, and it's one of the reasons that I am so proud to be here. But in my opinion, it's not the major theme of Jesus' story about the final judgment. In my opinion, the conservative approach and the kind of more liberal, progressive approach of this story only get it partly right. That's because both tend to emphasize the individual. But the story isn't primarily about individuals being brought before Jesus for judgment. It's primarily about the nations being brought before Jesus for judgment. In the Hebrew Bible, the phrase "the nations" carries political connotations. The prophets always railed against the nations for their abuse of political power. Jesus takes up this prophetic strand. The final judgment isn't primarily about how individuals behaved. It's primarily about how the nations behaved. This is about politics. Political institutions will be judged. The New Testament calls these institutions the powers and the principalities. Paul says that our fight is not with flesh and blood, it's with these powers and principalities. The ancient prophets gave a clear warning to their own nation of Israel. If the nation, meaning the political, religious, and economic rulers, didn't care for the poor and the weak and the marginalized, the nation would fall. And here's what happened in Israel. The rulers began to amass a tremendous amount of wealth for themselves and for their friends, and they neglected the needs of the poor and the marginalized. The prophets said there would be consequences for these actions. A day of reckoning would come. And that day came. First, the Assyrian Empire came and destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel. Then the Babylonian Empire came and destroyed the southern kingdom of Judah. The Assyrians and the Babylonians came, according to the prophets, because the nation did not care for who Jesus calls the least of these. And the Assyrians and the Babylonians created hell on earth for Israel and Judah. So Jesus, the judge, stands firmly within the Jewish prophetic tradition when he warns that the nations would fall if they don't give food to the hungry, water to the thirsty, welcome the stranger, give clothes to those in need, care for the sick, and visit people in prison. In the Jewish prophetic tradition, prophecy is not only about future events. In fact, it's only partly about future events. Jewish prophecy is much more about the present. It's about the here and now. The prophets always said, if you continue down this path, it will lead to destruction. The point is to change your ways now. The nations of Israel and Judah didn't change their ways. They acted as goats. So they experienced the consequences of not caring for the poor and the marginalized when the Assyrian and Babylonian Empire created hell on earth for them. And just a generation after Jesus was crucified, the leaders of Israel had become goats once again, and the Roman Empire destroyed Jerusalem, creating hell on earth. Jesus' prophetic warning isn't primarily about future events. It's primarily about the present. It's about now. When we talk about hell, it's often in terms of, hey, where are you going after you die? Heaven or hell? But that misses the larger point that Jesus was making. Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is already among us. It's here. It's now. And if that's the case, then hell is already among us too. So I believe in hell, not so much as a future reality of punishment, but as a present reality. And we are being punished by the hells that we create. All you have to do is open your eyes and you'll see the violence that has been spreading like the eternal fires of hell since the beginning of humankind. We see those fires burning now in our country and throughout the world. For example, the previous administration conducted massive drone warfare attacks in the Middle East. Those attacks missed 90% of their intended targets, killing an average of 80 civilians a month. That's bad enough. But the present administration has increased the drone warfare program, which now kills an estimated 360 civilians a month. These are the least of these that Jesus talked about. Our drone program dehumanizes innocent civilians, murdering them on large scales, creating hell on earth for them and their families. And we wonder, why do they hate us? But this dehumanizing of others can't be isolated to this type of action in other parts of the world. It infects our whole nation. Jesus says to visit those in prison, but the American prison industrial complex disproportionately imprisons African American men, imprisoning them with more severe sentences than their white counterparts for the same crimes. It's a racist system. Jesus said to care for the poor, but we currently have a tax bill in the Senate that in the long run will hurt the poor and the middle class, only to benefit the super rich. Jesus said nations are called to care for the sick, yet many who profess to follow him want to roll back health care advancements. Jesus said to welcome the stranger, but many of his followers would rather deport the stranger. And almost every day we're discovering how this violent abuse of power infects some men as their abuse of women is coming to light. The United States is being judged. We may be a nation that is a goat sent into the eternal fires, but as Alexander Solzhenitsyn once said, the line between good and evil runs down the center of each one of us. And maybe the line between sheep and goats runs down the center of us too, and down the center of every nation. But here's the good news about fire in the Bible. Fire is a purifying agent. It's meant to burn up all the bad stuff, all the racism and classism and patriarchy and hatred and violence are burned up so that we can live into God's kingdom. Sometimes we have to go through the pain and the fires of hell in order to be better. But make no mistake, hell doesn't have the last word. God's grace and transforming love have the last word. So what do we do? Part of the answer involves reforming our politics. To make America great is to follow the criteria that Jesus laid forth in Matthew 25 for the nations. To care for the sick and clothe the naked. Not only to visit prisoners, but to set the captives free. To welcome the strangers and to feed the hungry. But we can't just wait for politicians to enact these policies. It's up to us as individuals and as a church to do what we can, and you already do so much. We are limited. In the midst of these hells on earth, we can do a little bit here and a little bit there. We often think that we need to perform extraordinary acts of love in order to change things, but that's not true. What really matters isn't extraordinary acts. What matters is ordinary acts of love to bring God's kingdom of heaven to earth. A smile, a hello, an act of grace or forgiveness, resisting the urge to make a snide comment or seek revenge. In all of these ordinary acts of kindness, we participate with God in bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth. So may we work towards making our nation better. May we follow the teachings of Jesus laid out in Matthew 25. And may we love all people, sheep, goats, the least of these, even more deeply. Amen. Hi, everyone. This is Adam Erickson, reminding you that no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome at Clackamas United Church of Christ. We are located at 15303 Southeast Webster Road in Milwaukie, Oregon. Our worship service starts at 10:30 on Sundays, except for during the summer months we start at 10 o'clock. If you'd like more information on our church, you can visit our Facebook page or our website at c-ucc.org. You can also reach out to me through email at adam@c-ucc.org. Until next time, grace and peace be with you.